We begin in Brazil, which has seen a packed weekend and the mobilization of thousands of people across the country to fight for the jailed former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's right to run in the upcoming presidential elections. Workers' Party President Gleisi Hoffmann has now said the upcoming presidential election in October will be illegitimate if Lula is prevented from running.
At this moment in which the ex-president is imprisoned, we choose to have Fernando Haddad because he is closer and gives a better voice. The president is more connected to express the Workers' Party voice. But we don't have a plan B. We want Lula on the ballot on October 7. We will take it there. We will fight for this. If they violently remove Lula, if Lula isn't elected, it is an illegitimate election. If they don't allow Lula to participate in the electoral process, it will be an election with a strong sense of illegitimacy.
The Lula Libre March is continuing, and our correspondent, Andre Vieira, who is on the ground with the marchers. Let's hear from him now.
The three Lula Libre movement sectors are here near Brasilia. And tomorrow, these three groups will join to form a march here in the city center. This march began last Friday, and it is an action that demands the constitutional right of former Brazilian President Lula da Silva to participate in the upcoming elections, and also to demand his freedom. But this is not the only mobilization that is happening here. There is also a hunger strike that began 14 days ago. Today, the strikers participated in a religious act in front of the house of the minister, Edson Fachin. They are demanding freedom for Lula and also for the justice to act impartially, because they are saying that it's a political persecution against him. That in an interview with local media, the chief of the federal police talked about the case of Lula's freedom. He established that he has received pressure from the Michel Temer government, as well as the general attorney and judge, Sergio Moro. The information has had a lot of impact within the Workers' Party. The actual declaration of the chief of police confirmed once more the illegality of the case and its political position. Let's remember Judge Rogerio Fabretto released Lula da Silva, but the decision was not fulfilled. On August 15, an act will be held here in Brasilia because of the registry of Lula's candidacy, with some 50,000 people expected to attend.
The Argentine Nobel Peace Prize winner Perez Esquivel has joined the march with the MST, and he told us why.
I want to express my solidarity with the people of Brazil and for the freedom of Lula, who is a political prisoner. We need to bear in mind that what they're trying to do is keep him out of the elections, and that is not only happening to him, but also in other countries in Latin America. The extreme right is advancing in the domination over the people. That's why we demand Lula Libre and for him to participate in the elections, so the Brazilian people choose who they want to govern. There is immense international solidarity in favor of Lula. I have nominated him for the World Peace Prize. That's why we are here.
He also visited with the hunger strikers who are into their 14th day and who are pressuring the judiciary to free Lula. To talk more about Lula's situation moving forward and the presidential elections in October, we are being joined live by our correspondent in Brazil, Mia Alberti. Hello, Mia. Thank you so much for joining us. So, as we heard there, the Workers' Party is saying that the election will be illegitimate without the participation of Lula da Silva. Are they alone in this, or have others joined them in declaring the election invalid without his participation?
Well, this happened just today, this morning, as we saw Gleisi Hoffmann, the president of the party, saying that the Workers' Party would consider these elections illegitimate if Lula cannot run. Now, they are the first ones to say this, and for now they are the only ones. But let's remember that Lula is in front of the electoral run with 29% of voters, and that is a huge chunk of voters here in Brazil, and they will follow whatever the Workers' Party will tell them, because they are supporting Lula, they are supporting the Workers' Party. If that is enough to boycott an election, I do not think so, because that would mean that the Workers' Party, that Lula and that his supporters would be giving the election freely to Jair Bolsonaro, the candidate of the far-right party, which is leading the elections after Lula.
So what can we expect from the campaign, and how will it, or how can it play out without the participation of the most popular candidates?
Well, this is the first time that this happens. So the short answer is nobody knows yet. But the long answer is that there is a division between legal teams and the legal landscape here in Brazil on what's going to happen. For example, the companies that do the polls are debating whether they should include Lula or if they should include Fernando Haddad, the man who has been a mayor of São Paulo for years and has been appointed as Lula's spokesperson in this race. And he is the plan B for the Workers' Party. If Lula cannot run, he will be the Workers' Party candidate. So we don't know yet. Also on the debates, they are still trying to involve Lula in the debates, and if that doesn't work, they want to have Fernando as the spokesperson for Lula. But one thing is for certain, that they are trying to get Lula's name and image on the television campaigns and on the ballots. And if they can hold Lula as their candidate with the appeals on the Supreme Court, with appeals on the Electoral Court until September 17, that means that Lula's name and Lula's picture will be on the ballot, and that's what the Workers' Party are trying to achieve.
So Mia, let's talk about the candidates a little more. We have the right-winger Jair Bolsonaro polling in second place. We have the center-right Geraldo Alckmin, the environmentalist Marina Silva, followed by the leftist Ciro Gomes. It's quite a mixed bag, and we're facing the least predictable election in decades in Brazil. What does this actually mean for the country and for voters?
Well, firstly, we can say that this means that the election is most probably going to go to a second round with the two most favorable candidates here in Brazil. The second thing, we don't know, because, well, like you said, this is one of the most unpredictable elections in Brazil ever. And right now, 30% of the electorate is still undecided. And we are talking about over 60 million people here in Brazil. That can win or break the election. So we will be waiting to see how those people will vote. But one thing is for certain, is that this amount of candidates for every political side just shows that the Brazilian people is kind of tired of the political establishment, and they want new.
Okay, so we've been speaking to our correspondent in Brazil, Mia Alberti. But other news now, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, has started his Latin American tour in Brazil. Mattis will meet with his Brazilian counterpart, Joaquim Silva y Luna, and the Foreign Minister, Aloysio Nunes, to discuss the use of a local military base as well as weapon trade agreements. The U.S. Secretary of Defense will also visit Chile, Colombia, and Argentina in an attempt to balance China's approach to the Latin American region, and that's according to analysts. Argentina's former president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, has testified before a judge in Buenos Aires in a corruption scandal that allegedly took place during her term in office. The case digs into an alleged network in which businessmen would have paid bribes in exchange for public contracts. Fernández has denounced the investigation, saying it's a plot against progressive leaders in Latin America, and compared what was happening to her to the situation facing Brazil's former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and Ecuador's former president, Rafael Correa. And before leaving for the court, Fernández responded via Twitter, saying that these testimonies, investigations, and documentation are a structural problem for Argentina, and that it's the fourth time she is appearing before the court in a criminal investigation, accused of being the protagonist of the corruption scandal.
This morning, former President and current Senator Cristina Fernández de Kirchner appeared in court to testify in a corruption case. It's important to remember that the case involves the driver of one of the most influential people in the Ministry of Federal Planning, who allegedly kept journals that detailed a supposed bribery scheme linked to public projects. But those accused are denouncing that the journals haven't been presented as evidence until now. On her part, the former president didn't respond to any questions from the judge or the prosecution, but presented a statement. The hearing started at 10 in the morning local time. The Senate is expected to debate possible raids on the homes of the former president in an attempt to remove her from immunity. This follows the trend of persecution seen in the region against politicians associated with left-wing governments.
No aparecen, las fotocopias no son una prueba en sí mismas, son un indicio.
The graft scandal has hit the Argentine currency, peso, which fell 3.8% to the dollar. That accounts for a 9% loss in 15 days. In order to control the damage, the government is going to abandon the scheduled daily auctions of the dollar, which had been agreed to with the International Monetary Fund. Annual inflation is expected to reach 32%, according to the market survey disseminated by the central bank, despite the fact that the government has committed itself to not exceed 30% to the IMF. Now today, August 13, marks the birthday of the former Cuban president, Fidel Castro. Fidel was considered the worst enemy of the oppressors of the world. He also inspired leaders such as Hugo Chavez, Daniel Ortega, and Evo Morales, while he fought to give back power to the people. So let's have a look.
A man of thousands of battles and hundreds of ideas, Fidel Castro led a small group of revolutionaries who staged an armed attack on the Moncada barracks and fought in the Sierra Maestra between 1956 and 1959 until the revolution. Since then, he had to battle the empire over and over again in the invasion of Playa Girón. He also fought off attacks against Cuban civilians and the unfair economic and financial blockade that continues until today. But his revolutionary action for the benefit of the people transcended the continent.
Si alguien quiere saber quién es Fidel,
to understand exactly who Fidel truly was, look at the last 50 years of Latin American and Caribbean history. There you will find his footprint.
Fidel survived hundreds of assassination attempts. The worldwide campaign to discredit him could not stop the love and admiration millions had for him around the world. The bonds between the people of Cuba and Venezuela, solidified by the presidency of Hugo Chavez, became a cornerstone of the historic and ideological front.
Long live the ideas of Bolívar. Long live the ideas of Martí.
The leader of the Cuban Revolution will continue to be an icon of independence in Latin America and the Caribbean. He led a social movement revered around the world.
Okay, so we're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Cuba, the National Assembly has been discussing the preliminary draft of the new constitution. The Assembly is set to discuss the new project until the 15th of November. Millions of Cubans will also participate in the debate in a solid demonstration of popular democracy.
Today began the popular council process of the new project of Constitution of Cuba. All Cubans, after being approved at the National Assembly on the 21st and 22nd of July, now the constitutional project is in the street and people are going to start discussing at their work, at their neighborhoods, what there are their thoughts, what their proposals, what are their expectations with this constitutional reform. Over 1 million of these constitutional projects have been sold to the people here at the mail offices, and the people are very thrilled for these discussions to begin.
Thank you, Laura, for that report. Now, Venezuelans have marched once again to support President Nicolas Maduro. Thousands of citizens dressed in red marched to the capital, Caracas, to defend the country's sovereignty and independence after the August 4th assassination attempt on Maduro. Over the weekend, the president shared images taken from the phones of the alleged perpetrators of the assassination attempt. Those photos show the place where the accused trained with the drones used in the attack. And members of the Movement for Social Justice in Trinidad and Tobago gathered outside the Brazilian embassy in Port of Spain to voice their support for the jailed former President Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva. Lauding Lula's progressive welfare policies, they called for his immediate release. The head of the Movement for Social Justice also presented a formal letter to the Brazilian ambassador, which was signed by the Workers' Union and other social organizations.
So this is the president of Brazil, elected by the majority of the Brazilian people very significantly, and during his presidency he was able to implement major reforms, social and economic reforms, that saw millions of Brazilians being lifted out of poverty.
Parts of North Trinidad have been besieged by floodwaters. Video footage and video shared by citizens show cars partially submerged as motorists try to navigate floodwaters on impassable roads. A huge piece of pitch was reportedly lifted from a street in front of a high school in Belmont. The Office of Disaster Preparedness has issued an adverse weather alert yellow because of the heavy rains and floods. The weather is as a result of a low-level trough interacting with the intertropical conversion zone. There have been no reports of injury so far, but extensive damage to property is evident. Heavy flooding in Amazonas, Venezuela has affected the Barrio Miranda and Puerto Ayacucho areas most seriously. Emergency assistance via the Civil Protection Agency and the armed forces were deployed. Homes were almost fully submerged and persons had to use canoes to get around. The nearby river allegedly burst its banks, and residents said it was the first time they'd seen it get so high. In the last decade, Uruguay has changed its migration policy, and as a result, there has been increased immigrant arrivals to the country. A recent study conducted by the Social Protection Bank explores the effects of this movement.
Migratory flows have varied significantly in Latin America, especially in Uruguay. The democratic stability, its advanced labor relations, and its free access to education and health have turned the country into an attractive destination for the migrant collectives.
After 2008, there was an important change, and that's when a new reality occurred. People begin to look for opportunities in Uruguay, but they also see Uruguay as a friendly country. We are a country that has a very generous legislation with the worker that comes to Uruguay.
The Social Protection Bank took a look into which sectors of the economy benefit the most with the arrival of these workers. Trade and agricultural production are located in the first places, with almost 10,800 jobs. Following sectors are the manufacturing industry, administrative activities, teaching, accommodation, and food services. Despite this, entering the job market is not easy.
In terms of getting a job, it's very difficult. It was very hard for me. I left my resume everywhere, but nobody called me, so I decided to start working as a freelancer. I believe many immigrants become entrepreneurs.
The report also refers to the average school training migrants who arrive in Uruguay. 45% of them have third-level studies, seen as a great value and opportunity.
They are overqualified compared to the national average. This does not have to scare people. On the contrary, it's good news. There are people who can work where there are vacancies, so they are not actually competing with national workers.
While it's true that foreign workers add up to 34,086, the number of jobs available reach 35,875. This implies that many occupy more than one work position. According to the Social Protection Bank, the enrollment of foreign workers in the job market is still low, with figures close to 2.3%.
All right, time now for another short break, but join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Thousands of people gathered in Sada on Monday for the funerals of the victims of last week's deadly airstrike on a bus full of children. According to local officials, a Saudi-led coalition airstrike hit a bus full of children returning from a summer camp in northern Yemen on Thursday. As a result, 51 people, including 40 children, lost their lives, according to local Houthi authorities. And Turkey is struggling to stabilize its economy after its currency, the lira, hit an all-time low last week. The stock market also plunged sharply. Turkish policymakers and the central bank took a series of market-boosting measures, but failed to revive the financial system. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has urged traders not to panic. Now, the crisis started after the United States announced the doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminium from Turkey over its refusal to extradite a U.S. preacher imprisoned in the country.
On the one hand, you are a strategic partner when using Afghanistan when everybody else was leaving. You are a strategic partner with us in Somalia. You are a strategic partner in NATO. And on the other hand, you stab your ally in the back. Is this acceptable?
SPK'sıyla üzerine gidiyoruz.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's offer of unconditional talks to improve bilateral ties. He also accused the Iranian government of economic mismanagement in the face of reimposed U.S. sanctions. Now, Washington reimposed the sanctions last week after pulling out of the 2015 international deal aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear program in return for an easing of economic sanctions. Well, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesiotv.net/English. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesio English, I'm Suni Gray. Thank you for watching.